prevalent in our lives and the lives of everyone that we interact with, but what we found through our research is that that's definitely not true for most of the world. In fact, the usage of internet is extremely unequal, and so when we talk about the digital divide, we're referring to the unequal spread of internet access throughout the world, and more than access, the unequal usage of internet across the world.
There's just an age-old thing that we used to talk about as an information gap. I mean, and this could apply to printing, it could apply to radio, TV, almost anything that comes in. So any new thing that comes in, the people who are best off are going to get to it first, take the most initial advantage out of it, and the people who are least well off are going to come along at the tail end of it and get the least advantage out of it.
We've had a lot of global implications in terms of the digital divide, and the first one is economics. So we saw that there's a really high correlation between internet usage and country's GDP, and that number was 0.78, which means that a country's internet usage is highly correlated with their competitiveness. And the second major implication we found was political implication. The first is that internet really spurs civic engagement because it provides a forum for citizens to figure out what exactly is going on in the politics of their nation, but also start movements, voice their opinions about how their government is being run. And we found that in more oppressive, so authoritarian or totalitarian regimes, people were less likely to have internet access. They were less likely to be able to speak out against their government.
Austin's one of the better situated places in the whole country. We've thought about this, worked on it, a bunch of different people have worked on it. It's still not great. You know, it's probably the place that, from what I can tell, where it really happens most effectively is like at the level of the city. If the city government gets its act together to really do this stuff. But, okay, take Austin. Suddenly we're gentrifying so fast that all the poor people are getting pushed out of Austin. So is Manor going to pick this up, and Bastrop and Lockhart and all that kind of stuff? Or will the people who used to benefit from Austin programs now just be pushed out into rural areas that aren't prepared to do this kind of stuff? So there's, in fact, we're now calling it the suburbanization of poverty. And, you know, it's interesting. That's a new wrinkle for this. You know, Austin geared up for 20 years to provide stuff for the urban poor and urban needy, but what happens when they can't afford to live here anymore?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an ongoing problem. And I mean, that's the thing. We can't ever really quite take our eyes off of it because there's always a new wrinkle. We just did a survey with the city, and 93% of Austin has a connection at home, but 6% of the people who are living in Austin, who are in one of the places, don't know how to use it. They don't know what to do with the internet. There's a group called the Austin Freenet that's sponsored by the city that's just been a great group. They've got several different centers where people can go walk in and just get the help they need when they need it. And one of the things that we really need in the city, there's a whole bunch of different nonprofits who are doing outreach to youth. You know, typically poor, less educated, more geographically isolated, minority youth. They always need mentors, and they always need people to be volunteers. Like one of the best programs in the city is aimed at young Latinas called Latinitas. They do exactly this kind of stuff at a bunch of different after-school programs and summer camps and all that. And they're great, and they very much depend on you know, college-age volunteers. In part, because there's two things going on. Part of it's the strictly technological. But I've come to realize that there's more than that going on. You have to help people see the relevance of all this. I'll give one example. So this group, River City Youth Foundation, does both parent and youth programs, ideally coordinated, so the whole family's kind of involved. And so they'll be teaching the youth how to set goals. And then they'll say, once they get that, begin to figure it out, and they get them involved in technology to start looking at possibilities, figuring it out. So hooking the tech to kind of real world things. Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then once you get some idea, how realistic is that? You know, check it out online, look at things, and then what education do you need to get there? And start setting specific educational goals to get there. Again, using technology. So and then they use similar things with parents. How much education does your kid need to get ahead in the U.S. these days? Probably more than they realize.
Last
semester we worked with Breakthrough Austin, a couple of CS students and I, through one of the CS student orgs. We worked with Breakthrough Austin and the Google Austin office, as well as the City of Boston, to kind of help close the digital divide a little bit here in the Austin community. So Breakthrough Austin is a nonprofit that takes in students like K through 12 and it mentors them throughout elementary, middle school, and high school until they graduate and go to college. And the nonprofit's main goal is to make sure that these first generation students enter college and succeed in their academics that way. But because they come from low-income families, they often don't have access to computers or the internet, and their parents are often very unaware of how important access to the internet is. So we coupled with Google Austin, so they were providing us funding to use with Breakthrough and somehow help them further their goal, but also close the digital divide, which was the project's goal. So we decided to use that funding and grant Chromebooks to each of the students that end up graduating high school through the program and entering college.
And so schools are good, libraries are good, nonprofits are great. There's a lot of stuff going on. It just doesn't reach everybody who needs it. I'll give you a real-world timeline. So the ball kind of got rolling on this in the 90s. The Clinton-Gore administration identified this as a pretty high priority. And lots of stuff happened, and even the state of Texas followed along and said, under the Bush governor administration, yeah, it's the priority, we're going to put money into it. Then somehow, after 2000, the national mood under the Republican administration got very negative on this. This is something the market will take care of. In fact, the head of the FCC under the first Bush administration literally said, well, it's kind of like a Mercedes divide. If I don't have a Mercedes right now and I want one, I just save up and wait. It was like the most idiotic statement I'd heard in decades, This is not a luxury. This is a necessity of life. This is an instrumental tool. And if you don't have it, you fall behind. So having this idiot say it's like having a Mercedes or not, how stupid can you possibly be? And ironically, Bush was happy to have a program under his governorship, but by the time he got to Washington, the National Party was very negative on this, so they killed that program in Texas too. So part of it's national politics. What are the priorities? And the conservative thinking tends to be, you shouldn't intervene in anything you don't have to. So the question is this something where you have to intervene? Is it so important that the federal government should put money into this? The ongoing barrier, the classic one that's always going to be there, is the rate of technological change. Things change fast enough that it's hard for really well-placed people to keep up, let alone some poor guy who just became aware that maybe he needs to pay attention to computers. And part of it has to do with policy. Like up until 1996, we defined a telephone in your home as a basic right. And if you look at the history of that, which we got set in place in the early 20s, that helped the U.S. enormously. We came up to World War II and then out of World War II, in some ways a much better placed as an economy because of that policy. And somehow, when the internet came in and we thought about what we're going to do with the internet, in 1996 we took a huge step backwards and said, nah, we don't need to have everybody have the internet. And it got a lot worse. And so we went from being probably one of the best positioned places in terms of information access in the world to down in the middle 20s. Because we do frankly have a society in a very general way with steadily widening social stratification. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And oddly enough, we had a vision in the early 20th century that really made the country great. And in some ways, we've kind of lost that vision. What do we have to do to make sure that even the guy putting the Ford car together can buy the Ford car? Or now the guy who might help sell an upper-end Apple phone also needs to probably have one. So, yeah, part of it's kind of the big picture vision. I think we're a little unclear these days on kind of what we want to be as a society.